The armed forces of the Russian Federation, Russian, Tr Vurozhana I Sily Rossiyskoye Federatsiyi, are the military service of the Russian Federation, established after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. On May 7, 1992, Boris Yeltsin signed a presidential decree establishing the Russian Ministry of Defense and placing all Soviet armed forces troops on the territory of the Russian Soviet Federative Socialist Republic under Russian control. The commander-in-chief of the armed forces is the President of Russia. The Russian armed forces were formed in 1992. Under Russian federal law, the RUAF along with the Federal Security Service, FSB, border troops, the National Guard, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, MVD, the Federal Protective Service, FSO, the Foreign Intelligence Service, SVR, and Emercom Civil Defense form Russia's military services and are under direct control of the Security Council of Russia. Service branches. Armed forces under the Ministry of Defense are divided into the three branches of armed forces: the ground forces, aerospace forces, and the Navy. The two separate troop branches, the strategic missile troops and the airborne troops. The logistical support, which has a separate status of its own. There are additionally two further separate troop branches, the National Guard and the Border Service. These retain the legal status of armed forces, while falling outside of the jurisdiction of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation. The National Guard is formed on the basis of the former internal troops of Russia. The new structure has been detached from the Ministry of Internal Affairs into a separate agency, directly subordinated to the President of Russia. The Border Service is a paramilitary organization of the Federal Security Service, the country's main internal intelligence agency. Both organizations have significant wartime tasks in addition to their main peacetime activities and operate their own land, air, and maritime units. The number of personnel is specified by decree of the President of Russia. On January 1, 2008, a number of 2,019,629 units, including military of 1,134,800 units, was set. In 2010, the International Institute for Strategic Studies, IISS, estimated that the Russian armed forces numbered about 1,027,000 active troops and in the region of 2,035,000 reserves, largely ex-conscripts. As opposed to personnel specified by decree, actual personnel in the forces are paid was reported by the Audit Chamber of Russia as 766,000 in October 2013. As of December 2016, the armed forces are at 93% of the required manpower, up from 82% reported in December 2013. According to Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, between 2005 to 2009 and 2010 to 2014, Russian exports of major weapons increased by 37%. Russia spent $66.4 billion on arms in 2015, then $69.2 billion in 2016, having taken third place, after the US and China. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, share of modern weapons in the armed forces reached from 26 to 48% among different kinds of troops in December 2014. This was raised to 70.7% as of July 2015. The average was 58% over the first half of 2017. History. The Soviet Union officially dissolved on December 25, 1991, leaving the Soviet military in limbo. For the next year and a half, various attempts to keep its unity and to transform it into the military of the Commonwealth of Independent States, CIS, failed. Over time, some units stationed in the newly independent republics swore loyalty to their new national governments, while a series of treaties between the newly independent states divided up the military's assets. Apart from assuming control of the bulk of the former Soviet internal troops and the KGB border troops, seemingly the only independent defense move the new Russian government made before March 1992 involved announcing the establishment of a National Guard. Until 1995, it was planned to form at least 11 brigades numbering 3,000 to 5,000 each, with a total of no more than 100,000. National Guard military units were to be deployed in 10 regions, including in Moscow, 3 brigades, Leningrad, 2 brigades, and a number of other important cities and regions. By the end of September 1991 in Moscow the National Guard was about 15,000 strong, mostly consisting of former Soviet Armed Forces servicemen. In the end, President Yeltsin tabled a decree on the temporary position of the Russian Guard, but it was not put into practice. After signing the Belovezh Accords on December 21, 1991, the countries of the newly formed CIS signed a protocol on the temporary appointment of Marshal of Aviation Yevgeny Shaposhnikov as Minister of Defense and Commander of the Armed Forces in their territory, including strategic nuclear forces. On February 14, 1992 Shaposhnikov formally became Supreme Commander of the CIS Armed Forces. On March 16, 1992 a decree by Boris Yeltsin created the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation, the operational control of Allied High Command and the Ministry of Defense, which was headed by President. Finally, on May 7, 1992, Yeltsin signed a decree establishing the armed forces and Yeltsin assumed the duties of the Supreme Commander. In May 1992, General Colonel Pavel Grachev became the Minister of Defense, and was made Russia's first army general on assuming the post. By August or December 1993 CIS military structures had become CIS military cooperation structures with all real influence lost. In the next few years, Russian forces withdrew from Central and Eastern Europe, as well as from some newly independent post-Soviet republics. While in most places the withdrawal took place without any problems, the Russian armed forces remained in some disputed areas such as the Sevastopol naval base in the Crimea as well as in Abkhazia and in Transnistria. The armed forces have several bases in foreign countries, especially on territory of the former Soviet republics. A new military doctrine, promulgated in November 1993, implicitly acknowledged the contraction of the old Soviet military into a regional military power without global ambitions. In keeping with its emphasis on the threat of regional conflicts, the doctrine called for a smaller, lighter, and more mobile Russian military, with a higher degree of professionalism and with greater rapid deployment capability. Such change proved extremely difficult to achieve. Under Pavel Grachev, defense minister from 1992 to 1996, little military reform took place, though there was a plan to create more deployable mobile forces. Later Defense Minister Rodionov, in office 1996 to 1997, had good qualifications but did not manage to institute lasting change. Only under Defense Minister Igor Sergeyev, in office 1997 to 2001, did a certain amount of limited reform begin, though attention focused upon the strategic rocket forces. 2008 military reform. Significant reforms were announced in late 2008 under Defense Minister Anatoly Serdyukov, in office 2007 to 2012, and major structural reorganization began in 2009. Key elements of the reforms announced in October 2008 included reducing the armed forces to a strength of 1 million by 2012, planned end date was 2016, reducing the number of officers, centralizing officer training from 65 military schools into 10 systemic military training centers, reducing the size of the central command, introducing more civilian logistics and auxiliary staff, elimination of cadre strength formations, reorganizing the reserves, reorganizing the army into a brigade system, and reorganizing air forces into an air-base system instead of regiments. On October 17, 2012 the head of the State Duma's Defense Committee told RIA Novosti that Russia planned to boost annual defense spending by 59% to almost 3 trillion rubles, $83.3 billion, in 2015 up from $61 billion in 2012. Targeted national defense spending as a percentage of GDP will amount to 3.2% in 2013, 3.4% in 2014 and 3.7% in 2015, Defense Committee Chairman Vladimir Komoedov is quoted as saying in the committee's conclusion on the draft budget for 2013 to 2015. The schedule envisaged reducing the total numbers in the officer corps from 335,000 to 150,000, but in early February 2011 Defense Minister Anatoly Serdyukov announced the decision to increase officers by 70,000 to 220,000 to counteract this structure. The Defense Ministry of the Russian Federation serves as the administrative body of the armed forces. Since Soviet times, the General Staff has acted as the main commanding and supervising body of the Russian armed forces. U.S. expert William Odom said in 1998 that the Soviet General Staff without the MOD is conceivable, but the MOD without the General Staff is not. However, currently the General Staff's role is being reduced to that of the Ministry's Department of Strategic Planning. The minister himself, currently Sergei Shoigu, may now be gaining further executive authority over the troops. Other departments include the Personnel Directorate as well as the Logistical Support, Railway Troops, Signal Troops, and Construction Troops. The Chief of the General Staff is currently General of the Army Valery Gerasimov. The Russian military is divided into three services: the Russian Ground Forces, the Russian Navy, and the Russian Aerospace Forces. In addition, there are two independent arms of service, the Strategic Missile Troops and the Russian Airborne Troops. The armed forces as a whole are traditionally referred to as the Army, Armia, except in some cases, the Navy is specifically singled out. Military districts. Since late 2010, the ground forces as well as the air forces and Navy are distributed among four military districts: Western Military District, Southern Military District, Central Military District, and the Eastern Military District, which also constitute four joint strategic commands: West, South, Central, and East. Previously, from 1992 to 2010, the ground forces were divided into six military districts: Moscow, Leningrad, North Caucasian, Privoltsk-Ural, Siberian and Far Eastern, and Russia's four fleets and one flotilla were organizations on par with the ground forces military districts. These six MDS were merged into the four new MDS, which now also incorporate the air forces and naval forces. There is one remaining Russian military base, the 102nd Military Base, in Armenia, left of the former Transcaucasus Group of Forces. It likely reports to the Southern Military District. In mid-2010 a reorganization was announced which consolidated military districts and the Navy's fleets into four Joint Strategic Commands, OSC. In 2014 the Northern Fleet was reorganized in separate Joint Strategic Command. Geographically divided, the five commands are: Joint Strategic Command West, Western Military District, HQ in St. Petersburg, includes the Baltic Fleet. Joint Strategic Command Northern Fleet, HQ in Severomorsk. Joint Strategic Command South, Southern Military District, HQ in Rostov-on-Don, includes the Black Sea Fleet and Caspian Flotilla. Joint Strategic Command Center, Central Military District, HQ in Ekaterinburg. Joint Strategic Command East, Eastern Military District, HQ in Khabarovsk, includes the Pacific Fleet. The plan was put in place on December 1, 2010 and mirrors a proposed reorganization by former Chief of the General Staff Army General Yuri Bolyuyevsky for a Regional Command East, which was not implemented. The four commands were set up by a decree of President Medvedev on July 14, 2010. In July 2011, an Operational Strategic Command of Missile Space Defense has also been established on the basis of the former Special Purpose Command of the Russian Air Force. A presidential decree of January 2011 named commanders for several of the new organizational structures. Russian military command posts, according to globalsecurity.org, include Chekhov/Sharapovo, about 80 kilometers, 50 miles, south of Moscow, for the General Staff and President, Chadaevka near Penza, Voronovo in Moscow, and a facility at Lipetsk all for the national leadership, Yamantau in the Urals, and command posts for the strategic rocket forces at Kuntseva in Moscow, primary, and Koavinsky Mountain in the Urals, alternate. It is speculated that many of the Moscow bunkers are linked by the special underground Moscow Metro 2 line. Russian security bodies not under the control of the Ministry of Defense include the internal troops of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, now the National Guard of Russia's National Guard Forces Command, the Border Guard Service of Russia, part of the Federal Security Service, the Kremlin Regiment and the rest of the Federal Protective Service, Russia, and the Ministry of Emergency Situations, the country's civil defense service since 1995 and successor to earlier civil defense units. Naval fleets. The Navy consists of 4 fleets and 1 flotilla. Northern Fleet, HQ at Severomorsk, forms own joint strategic command. Baltic Fleet, HQ at Kaliningrad in the exclave of Kaliningrad Oblast, subordinated to Joint Strategic Command West. Black Sea Fleet, HQ at Sevastopol, disputed region of Crimea, subordinated to Joint Strategic Command South. Caspian Flotilla, HQ at Astrakhan, subordinated to Joint Strategic Command South. Pacific Fleet, HQ at Vladivostok, subordinated to Joint Strategic Command East. The Kaliningrad Special Region, under the command of the Commander Baltic Fleet, comprises ground and coastal forces, formerly the 11th Guards Army, with a motor rifle division and a motor rifle brigade, and a fighter aviation regiment of Sukhoi Su-27 flanker, as well as other forces. Similarly, the Northeast Group of Troops and Forces, headquartered at Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, comprises all Russian armed forces components in the Kamchatka Oblast and the Chukotka Autonomous Okrug and is subordinate to the Commander Pacific Fleet headquartered in Vladivostok. Personnel. Conscription is still used in Russia, the term of service being 12 months, and eligible age is between 18 and 27 years old. Deferments are provided to undergraduate and graduate students, men solely supporting disabled relatives, parents of at least 2 children and upon presidential proclamation to some employees of military-oriented enterprises. Men holding a PhD, as well as sons and brothers of servicemen killed or disabled during their military service, are released from conscription. There were widespread problems with hazing in the army, known as dedovshchina, where first-year draftees are bullied by second-year draftees, a practice that appeared in its current form after the change to a 2-year service term in 1967. According to Anna Politkovskaya, in 2002, a complete battalion, more than 500 men, had been killed not by enemy fire but by beatings. To combat this problem, a new decree was signed in March 2007, which cut the conscription service term from 24 to 18 months. The term was cut further to 1 year on January 1, 2008. 30% of Russian armed forces personnel were contract servicemen at the end of 2005. For the foreseeable future, the armed forces will be a mixed contract/conscript force. The Russian armed forces need to maintain a mobilization reserve to have manning resources capable of reinforcing the permanent readiness forces if the permanent readiness forces cannot deter or suppress an armed conflict on their own. Professional soldiers now outnumber their conscript counterparts in the Russian army for the first time in Russian history, Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu told Russian media April 28, 2015. The ranks of the Russian military are also open to non-Russian citizens of the Commonwealth of Independent States, of which Russia is the largest member. By December 2003, the Russian parliament had approved a law in principle to permit the armed forces to employ foreign nationals on contract by offering them Russian citizenship after several years' service yet, up to 2010, foreigners could only serve in Russia's armed forces after getting a Russian passport. Under a 2010 Defense Ministry plan, foreigners without dual citizenship would be able to sign up for 5-year contracts and will be eligible for Russian citizenship after serving 3 years. The change could open the way for CIS citizens to get fast-track Russian citizenship, and counter the effects of Russia's demographic crisis on its army recruitment. Each soldier in duty receives an identity card of the Russian Armed Forces. Awards and decorations of the armed forces are covered at awards and emblems of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. On November 17, 2011, General Nikolai Makarov said that Russia had reached a crisis in the conscript service where there simply were not sufficient able-bodied men to draft and was forced to have its conscription. In March 2013, Defense Minister Shoigu promised that all army quarters would have showers by the end of the year. RIA also said that the shower plans were the latest in a series of creature comfort improvements the Defense Ministry had recently announced. In mid-January, Shoigu said he would rid the army of its antiquated foot wraps, or portyanki, and a few days later the designer of Russia's new army uniform said that the ear-flap hats traditionally worn in winter would be replaced with more modern headgear. Budget. Between 1991 and 1997, newly independent Russia's defense spending fell by a factor of 8 in real prices. In 1998, when Russia experienced a severe financial crisis, its military expenditure in real terms reached its lowest point, barely 1/4 of the USSR's in 1991, and 2/5 of the level of 1992, the first year of Russia's independent existence. Defense spending is consistently increasing by at least a minimum of 1/3 year-on-year, leading to overall defense expenditure almost quadrupling over the past 6 years, and according to Finance Minister Alexei Kudrin, this rate is to be sustained through 2010. Official government military spending for 2005 was $32.4 billion, though various sources have estimated Russia's military expenditures to be considerably higher than the reported amount. Estimating Russian military expenditure is beset with difficulty. The annual IISS military balance has underscored the problem numerous times within its section on Russia. The IISS military balance comments, by simple observation, would appear to be lower than is suggested by the size of the armed forces or the structure of the military-industrial complex, and thus neither of the figures is particularly useful for comparative analysis. By some estimates, overall Russian defense expenditure is now at the second highest in the world after the USA. According to Alexander Kanchin, chairman of the Public Chamber of Russia on Affairs of Veterans, Military Personnel, and Their Families, the Russian military is losing up to $13 billion to corruption every year. On September 16, 2008, Russian Prime Minister Vladimir Putin announced that in 2009, Russian defense budget will be increased to a record amount of $50 billion. On February 16, 2009, Russia's deputy defense minister said state defense contracts would not be subject to cuts this year despite the ongoing financial crisis, and that there would be no decrease in 2009. The budget would still be 1,376 billion rubles, and in the current exchange rates this would amount to $41.5 billion. However, later that month, due to the world financial crisis, the Russian Parliament's Defense Committee stated that the Russian defense budget would instead be slashed by 15%, from $40 billion to $34 billion, with further cuts to come. On May 5, 2009, First Deputy Prime Minister Sergei Ivanov said that the defense budget for 2009 will be 1.3 trillion rubles, $39.4 billion. 322 billion rubles are allocated to purchase weapons, and the rest of the fund will be spent on construction, fuel storage, and food supply. According to the head of the Defense Committee of the State Duma Vladimir Komoyedov, Russia plans to spend 101.15 billion rubles on nuclear weapons in 2013 to 2015. The budget provisions under the Nuclear Weapons Complex section in 2013 to 2015 will amount to 29.28 billion rubles, 33.3 billion rubles and 38.57 billion rubles respectively, Komoyedov said, Vechernaya Moskva reports. Komoyedov added that in 2012 the spending on nuclear weapons made up 27.4 billion rubles. The draft law on the federal budget for 2013 and for the planning period of 2014 and 2015 will be discussed in the first reading on October 19, 2012, The Voice of Russia reports. In a meeting in Sochi in November 2013, President Putin said the country's defense budget will reach 2.3 trillion rubles, stressing the huge amount in comparison to the 2003 budget, which stood on 600 billion rubles. The Russian government's published 2014 military budget is about 2.49 trillion rubles, approximately $69.3 billion, the third largest in the world behind the US and China. The official budget is set to rise to 3.03 trillion rubles, approximately $83.7 billion, in 2015, and 3.36 trillion rubles, approximately $93.9 billion in 2016. As of 2014, Russia's military budget is higher than any other European nation, and approximately 1/7, 14%, of the US military budget. In 2015, SIPRI found that Russia was the world's second biggest exporter of major weapons for the period 2010 to 14, increasing exports by 37%. India, China, and Algeria accounted for almost 60% of total Russian exports. Asia and Oceania received 66% of Russian arms exports in 2010-14, Africa 12% and the Middle East 10%. Procurement. About 70% of the former Soviet Union's defense industries are located in the Russian Federation. Many defense firms have been privatized, some have developed significant partnerships with firms in other countries. The recent steps towards modernization of the armed forces have been made possible by Russia's economic resurgence based on oil and gas revenues as well as strengthening of its own domestic market. Currently, the military is in the middle of a major equipment upgrade, with the government in the process of spending about $200 billion, what equals to about $400 billion in PPP dollars, on development and production of military equipment between 2006 to 2015 under the State Armament Program for 2007 to 2015, GPV. Mainly as a result of lessons learned during the August War, the State Armament Program for 2011 to 2020 was launched in December 2010. Prime Minister Putin announced that 20 to 21.5 trillion rubles, over $650 billion, will be allocated to purchase new hardware in the next 10 years. The aim is to have a growth of 30% of modern equipment in the Army, Navy, and Air Force by 2015, and of 70% by 2020. In some categories, the proportion of new weapon systems will reach 80% or even 100%. At this point, the Russian MOD plans to purchase, among others, up to 250 ICBMs, 800 aircraft, 1,200 helicopters, 44 submarines, 36 frigates, 28 corvettes, 18 cruisers, 24 destroyers, 6 aircraft carriers, and 62 air defense battalions. Several existing types will be upgraded. The share of modern and advanced weapons in some branches of the Russian armed forces currently amounts over 60%, the Defense Ministry reported July 31, 2015. In total since 2012 and as of May 2017, the armed forces received more than 30,000 units of new and modernized weapons and equipment, including more than 50 warships, 1,300 aircraft, 4,700 tanks, and armored combat vehicles compared to 2 warships, 151 aircraft and 217 tanks received in 2007 to 2011. The Russian Army also receives 150 to 250 aircraft per year. Russian Federation is also developing drones, unmanned vehicles and military robots. As of 2011, Russia's chief military prosecutor said that 20% of the defense budget was being stolen or defrauded yearly. Nuclear weapons. As of January 2017, the Federation of American Scientists estimated that Russia has approximately 1,765 deployed strategic warheads, and another 2,700 non-deployed strategic and deployed and non-deployed tactical warheads, plus an additional 2,510 warheads awaiting dismantlement. Russia's Strategic Rocket Forces controls its land-based nuclear warheads, while the Navy controls the submarine-based missiles and the Air Force the air-launched warheads. Russia's nuclear warheads are deployed in 4 areas. Land-based immobile, silos, like R-36 and its replacement Rs-28 Sarma. Land-based mobile, like RT-2PM2 Topol-M and new Rs-24 Yars. Submarine-based, like R-29 RMU-2 Laner and RSM-56 Bulava. Air-launched warheads of the Russian Air Force's Long-Range Aviation Command. The military doctrine of Russia sees NATO expansion as one of the threats for the Russian Federation and reserves the right to use nuclear weapons in response to a conventional aggression that can endanger the existence of the state. In keeping with this, the country's nuclear forces received adequate funding throughout the late 1990s. The number of intercontinental ballistic missiles and warheads on active duty has declined over the years, in part in keeping with arms limitation agreements with the US and in part due to insufficient spending on maintenance, but this is balanced by the deployment of new missiles as proof against missile defenses. Russia has developed the new RT-2PM2 Topol-M, SS-27, missiles that are stated to be able to penetrate any missile defense, including the planned U.S. National Missile Defense. The missile can change course in both air and space to avoid countermeasures. It is designed to be launched from land-based, mobile TEL units. Russian nuclear forces are confident that they can carry out a successful retaliation strike if attacked. Because of international awareness of the danger that Russian nuclear technology might fall into the hands of terrorists or rogue officers who it was feared might want to use nuclear weapons to threaten or attack other countries, the federal government of the United States and many other countries provided considerable financial assistance to the Russian nuclear forces in the early 1990s. Many friendly countries gave huge amounts of money in lieu for Russian arms purchase deals which kept Russian agencies functioning. This money went in part to finance decommissioning of warheads under international agreements, such the Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, but also to improve security and personnel training in Russian nuclear facilities. In the late evening of September 11, 2007, the fuel-air explosive FMOR, father of all bombs, was successfully field-tested. According to the Russian military, the new weapon will replace several smaller types of nuclear bombs in its arsenal.
Please subscribe and thanks for watching.